Cool. I think we are nearing the time where folks will start joining. So I just wanted to brief you all with what are we discussing as of today, and what progress we have made so far, and see and have the discussions. So, okay. So what are we discussing today is something which we are calling read restrictions. So essentially, this is a solution that we want to have or return the policy evaluation results as part of the load table protocol. Now, what are these policies? These policies are fine-grained access control policies, which in typical scenario could be a column hiding policy, a column masking policy, a row access policy. So the premise of these policies have their like is that whenever you are seeing the data, you need to apply this transformation and filtering before you give that data back to the end user. Obviously, the way IRC has been working so far is that it works at a file level, basically, or to be specific, at a table level, in a sense that whenever someone asks access to the table, either he has the access to the whole table or he has the access to or he has no access to the table. So essentially, we vend credentials based on what grants are defined in the catalog. These are part of authorization, but in the load table, there is a very defined space which we call credentials, and these are vended back and we see the results. But what we are talking of here is that something more granular than a table, basically row, column, those level transformation, filtering, and seeing the end result. Obviously, the thing is that we are building upon the model that we have already. That is essentially, we still give the credentials, but we expect the client to do the right thing. Now, this works on a premise that client and the catalog have some predefined trust relationship, because there can be malicious clients, there can be some things that I don't know about, but so there needs to be an explicit trust relation. That is not something as part of the scope. But the way we are handling this is that these read restrictions will be an optional value, which catalogs can only give when they trust. And if they don't trust you at all, they can just fail your whole request with 403 unauthorized. Okay. So far, we had a lot of discussions in the community in the past. There have been proposals from AWS, there have been a proposal from Remayo, there have been a proposal and discussion about it from a couple of different ways and things to just solve the same problem that we are calling it read restriction. And as a course of that, we have been iterating into some to spec it out in this PR here. And that's what we want to discuss more on, how to make progress, how to address this feedback back, more fastly, and make get this in the fastest way possible and go from there. So we we will be having bi-weekly syncs to build consensus on this spec, and as course of that, we will also have discussions. Please feel free to chime in if you have more feedback. So what I have done at this point of time is that, since we have been already having these discussions, I just took out some of the open questions from this discussion or the spec PR into a Google Doc, and we can discuss from there. So Kevin already shared this Google Doc. If you may allow, I can just start sharing my screen and just go question by question. What we want right now is to define this restrictions in a way that are interoperable, that every engine understands it. So that's where we are coming from, and Iceberg is a very good venue to do that. So, okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Is my screen visible? Okay. Yeah. So.
Maybe zoom a little.
Yep. Okay. So. Yeah. Let me first show you what we have so far, and as well. So essentially, what we have so far is a required column projections, which you can think of essentially as a projection node of your query, which will have like filtering and transformation uh, in like packed in. So we have defined those reach restrictions and like how to apply them when you're reading it via a client. And then we have a row filter, which is essentially a row masking policy. This is strictly for like filtering your data and then applying these filters before you show this data. So now when we talk about like how do we model column projections, right? One thing we were thinking of is having so let's start with what's the landscape. So there is vendors such as AWS and like Microsoft, which supports column hiding. Like for example, if you don't have a column access, you'll not be seeing this column at all. But there are some vendors who have like just column masking, in a sense that you are allowed to see all the columns, but before you allow it, you will transform it. So you always see all the columns existence. It's just that you can attach transformation if you just don't want to show that particular column to the end user. So one thing is that we are describing it as a projection list, right? So how do we model this kind of a scenario when this is the current landscape? So do we model it as a allow list? Do we model it as a deny list as part of like that's one of the discussions we have, because everything has a pro and con. I think one major thing that Ryan highlighted is that if it's an allow list, if I have a table of 1,000 columns, then I will be sending all these 1,000 things into that particular structured object that we were discussing at, and it might not be the most efficient way to do that. Maybe generally, as per use case, that people only wants to allow restricted access to certain columns. Maybe deny list is a more possible way. So that's what we are discussing here. We have Ryan. Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
think the deny list. Sorry, do you want discussion now, or are you just going over the current issues? Because
Discussion now. I mean, we can go bullet item by bullet item. Yeah.
I think that the deny list makes sense for a couple of reasons. Like you said, the deny list is probably going to be smaller in general, right? And you only need to express what you're restricting access to. The other thing is it is the same. It's not negating the structure. So like we're saying, here are restrictions. Here are things you cannot read on behalf of this user, including like, a filter. It seems to me that the deny list fits better with that, saying like, these are the restricted columns, right? Because we're calling this read restrictions, restricted columns. If we were like, hey, these are the read restrictions, here are unrestricted columns, that just seems a little odd to me. So I think that it does fit better as a deny list, but please chime in if you guys have opinions.
What about rather than deny? Like I'm thinking, okay, this is, I assume only within trusted relationships. Why not just project the schema that they can see as opposed to actually introducing a deny, right? Just returning, these are all the things, these are all the ones that are transformed. Do they need to know about the other columns?
That is, I mean, so it's basically, that's the question.
Yeah.
Either way, we're talking about columns with transformations on top of them. Like you have to have a way of expressing a transformation, so we can't just use a schema. So
yeah, I get transformation, right? So, but that's different than like a deny for a column. Are you saying a deny for a column that they know is there and you're doing a transform on it, or you're actually hiding the column?
You have a list of things, right? What does that list mean?
What things?
You have a list of columns and potentially transformations of those columns. Does that list mean you can read these columns and you can and you must apply these transformations? Or does that list mean these are the columns you cannot read and these are the columns you must transform? It's a different interpretation. Basically, what does it mean if a column is not in that list?
So just to quickly,
I was stepping back one step before the list, which is the schema that you receive
So that's
just have the columns that you can access.
So that gives us problems because we may want to have restrictions on columns that you can't access dictating behavior. So this is where I think we had this discussion like a couple weeks back when we were talking about this. Because the engine really needs the full schema to know whether or not it can actually do certain things, we said we didn't want to restrict that specifically. Okay. Because, for example, you may say you can only see things where I literally have a column that says users are allowed to see this, right? But users can't see the user are allowed column. But that has to be in the schema because otherwise the engine, when it gets it, will be like, I can't apply this predicate. So that's basically why we backed off of, we don't want to touch the schema here.
And then we're differentiating being able to restrict access to it, like, a transform against a column that just nulls it out versus hiding the column from the client entirely. Like the existence of the column. Like if you do a show schema or something like that, you're saying you would expect that column would not even show up.
I think it really comes down to like what happens if you have a column that is not listed in this list. Does it mean we don't have any restrictions against that column? Or does it mean you cannot access that column? I think the best argument for the allow list is that it's kind of a fail closed situation, right? Like if you forget to update the list, then that column is not allowed.
Does that also dictate visibility of the columns?
Yes, I believe it does.
Yeah. I mean, for vendors which just supports like column hiding, they hide it from all the way. Like schema can be one way for just column hiding, but this structure is purposed to describe both the column hiding scenario and the column masking scenario. Hence, we are having a debate. Like one other perspective is that this is a thing that one needs to add, essentially a project node on top of my whole query. It is something that we are modeling it as. So that's where it comes up into like, okay, I have a base table, I see all the schema, but this is the additional projection we need to apply. That's one chain of thoughts. Sorry, I speak out of time. Yeah.
Or this is the top level of the column. Is that the idea?
Apologies.
Or the allow list, do we use like dot notation for nested fields? Kind of like, I mean, because that could end up being quite large.
Yes, I agree. So that is also one of the rationale not have allow list in a sense that when you have like this big number of columns, right, list, then you will have a very huge payload that you want to say. Then how do you express that? That is another aspect and then another aspect comes that if you have a struct and if you want to delay a certain part of the struct, how do you model that? So those are two two parts of the same problem on this whole front is what I will see. But yeah, definitely allow list has the con of being excessively big. Yeah. Sorry, I speak out of turn, so I will let folks who is next. Dan, do you have any more feedbacks on that? Okay, Laurent.
Yeah. So I just want to go back first on Dan's point, I guess, because like for me there was some confusion. Like the read restrictions are really about like read restrictions. So like if a column is denied, it's really at read. It doesn't mean like it's hidden out of the schema. Honestly, but at that point, like yeah, I mean. That's a catalog concern, like because like if really like you don't want to have access to the metadata, like the catalog should probably not return the things. Or like how can the catalog actually like change the schema or things like that? So like I have a problem with like saying like, oh, like we should not, I mean, we should hide the columns also like in the show schema, because I don't think it's always enforceable. Like there's a lot of things. But like on the read path, on the read restriction, definitively we can block. Like, or we can tell an engine, please do not allow reading the data, that specific data. Now, on that specific issue, although I agree with Ryan that like the deny list is probably like the best course of actions, I'm like, do we still want to make, for example, like a default policy to say, or like what type of default action do you want to say? Like, do you want to block reading columns by default because maybe you have like a very specific authorization engine which is very strict, and like you prefer to block by default and only allow subcolumns, or although you have like something, for example, which is like linear and you want just to mask things. So I wonder if you can be a bit more lax on that. Like I would be okay by denying this by default, but like I'm also like maybe like we can be a bit more like easy on the catalogs.
That makes sense. So, Lauren, just to go deeper into your feedback, is like you want to have like a default mode in which you in the catalog defines that okay, this is an allow, deny,
Yeah.
and then based on that, it leaves the interpretation of the projections.
Yeah,
to the
like if basically columns are not listed, then in the projections, you know, like what actions you would have to take for those columns. I think that's what I mentioned in the PR already, like in the
yeah, in the comment. Let me see if I can share that particular comment. Right, I'm sharing a window. Let me stop sharing and then just share that particular comment again. So if I understand correctly, this is what you're suggesting, right? Let me actually enlarge the stream. All right. Right. I believe uh, I agree that with Ryan here a little bit that like I mean not little bit like I agree that it is too much of a work on a client to actually know what allow and deny means, and I would rather say that okay, let's have a default, like let's have like the interpretation iron that okay, it's a deny or it's an allow. Are you okay with that kind of
I mean, can you
resolution?
clarify what does it mean by like it's too much for the client to know if that's allowing or denying?
So I
Because
mean, I think it's like in a sense that let's say if you pay, it's allow, right? So then client needs to understand allow, and it also needs to understand like what do you want to do in allow, right? Then when you define deny, I mean, whatever work you are doing in some having something like as a default, like you know, agreeing on a allow list or a deny list, it's twice the work that you now expect a client to do, and then expect it in the right way to be enforced. So I think that's where I am saying that okay, if the work was X, it's 2X right now.
I'm
From
kind of confused. Like if I'm a client, I'm creating an Iceberg table, I get a schema, I mean like 1,000 columns. I still need to evaluate for there's 1,000 columns. If the query can access that specific column, or is it blocked from accessing the column, or if it can access the column but with restrictions, which are like you need to apply a transformation on top of. So like I'm not sure what like that evaluation has to happen to all columns anyway. So I'm not sure what's harder here. Like I'm really confused.
I mean, harder in the sense that it's still a work like okay, if like as I said that it's more from that point of a view that okay, if you were doing X work to just having an allow list or a deny list, now we just leave the work to be like 2X work to be done in the client and to be doing that. I mean, I understand that okay, for each column you need to go to this list, and based on what is catalog telling you, a client needs to do the right thing, right? But now this if else needs to be present inside the client rather than just being in the catalog and letting it bake there. I mean, yes, sure, we can define it in the catalog in a well-defined way that allow means this, deny means this in a default policy mode, and this is what you should do as a client. It's just from the implementation point of view is what I think comes into play that okay, open to interpretation, or if like you know some things of that sort.
Okay, sorry. Like for me, like adding like one extra if else, or like on default, like internet to be an if else, like doesn't raise to this. I mean, to the level of complexity. Like I'm compare like for example to actually like the implementation of the policies and stuff, or like the expression engine. So sure, but like I'm still not convinced to be honest.
Okay. Okay, we can take a quick check of like what people think about this and allow like go from there. But I think one thing I'm just taking on a thing that there's a general consensus to have something like a deny. Maybe deny can be a default policy, or deny can be just a list. Like the default behavior should be deny rather than an allow. Is this a fair to conclude in this? I know I have not let Alex and Talat speak. Uh, but what do you think on that? Is it okay for you to just go for deny? Laurent, it's a question to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, okay. Alex, do you want to speak something?
I think the one thing that we obviously don't know what the engines are going to be doing under the hood with this information. Does it seem reasonable to everybody here that we don't think the engines, if given a deny list, are going to need to assemble the allow list on their own? Because if they're going to be assembling an allow list anyways, then we might as well just save them the effort and give them the allow list in the first place.
So I don't know about that. I think that most queries are not going to be select star, and that would be the case, right? So you're going to do some processing on the engine side no matter what. I think that it's just as simple on the engine side, and the more important thing to do here is, well, number one, I think we want to be consistent, right?
Agreed.
There's no need for complexity, especially in the security path. And number two, I lost number two, and that was the actual main point. So yeah, I don't think it is. Sorry, just move on without me. It'll come back.
If I may add a point into that, select star exclude, right? It's a very standard pattern that most of the engines already support. So the course of interpretation, if we say that one argument, we can say that, okay, this is not something that we are introducing right now. Deny list is something, is also supported by SQL semantics as well. So maybe that could another rationale. Yeah.
True. What I was going to say is the important thing to be optimizing for here is just the general case of what do we need to send down from the service. Sending 1,000 or 2,000, yes, you can read this, is, I think, going to be just bigger payloads and less common, right? Like the more common case is a deny list, because that's how we model these things. And most of the time, the number of sensitive columns in a table is low compared to the total columns in a table. So like we should just model this the same way. That way we have smaller payloads and you're not like doing a whole bunch of JSON serialization from the service to the client.
We already know that we're getting tables into the thousands of columns. So we should definitely consider anything that scales along that dimension is something we have to be careful about.
Yeah. I could not agree more on the JSON serialization, because that is such an expensive operation.
Agreed. Cool. Talat, do you want to go?
Yeah, I just want to give as an input. I don't have any preferences about allow list and deny list, but basically I worked for the security companies for a while, and the zero trust is the best thing for the security companies, and they usually reject everything else on firewall, for example. Then they just start allowing those things. If you go from the in that sense, I believe we should assume that if our tables are secure, we should have the allow list and only allow the columns if there is, the access for the user. The Prashant, you can go, but I want to have a second.
Please go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
Second thing is that I felt like we just jump in the internals of the engine. I believe we should set back and look at that, how we are going to set the policies. I was thinking about that, okay, we start discussing allow list and the deny list, but how the policy is going to be set for Iceberg tables, then engine will have that information. Then allow list and deny list is the second step for the policy application. This is just suggestion. Maybe we should discuss how we are going to set the policies. I saw Micah's, the proposal about adding a tags, and I believe that model is very useful for most of the cases. I'm not saying that that we should do that but the adding attacks on the columns and the to get the tag columns is also may ease the deny list allow list behavior.
Let's be clear on tags, because there are way too many uses of tags. Micah's proposal was not anything to do with column level tagging, so that's a separate thing. And we also have table tags. So what I like to do is call these column level or table level labels, which are things, basically annotations for a column or a table that are accessible to security policy. I think that is by far the most common way to apply column level policy, is to, like, say, tag a SSN column PII and have a policy that says, only HR users can see PII information, something like that. That I think fits with what you're saying, Talat, which is the deny list approach, because most things are not saying like, hey, this needs to be tagged so you can read it. It's actually usually that you have access to the table, and then there are tags further restricting access to specific columns or rows of the table. So like that's how I think about it, which I think also fits with this sort of restricted columns or deny list approach.
I agree. That's why I just say that we should set back and define how we are going to, to set the policies. Then it will also give us the ease of, what we are going to implement on deny list or allow list.
I think I mentioned on the chat, but like policy is for catalogs to decide. What we're trying to determine here is when a catalog talks to an engine, what exactly is it sending to express what its decision was. So like a catalog could be in an allow list mode, but we're saying if that's kind of separate from this, it's going to send a payload that says these are either the columns you can access or you can't access, but it can always populate that based on however it wants to define how policy rules should be applied. So like if it does this based on tags, it just is always generating one of these payloads based on tags. But it doesn't necessarily have to mimic how the policy itself is constructed. So that's, I think that's also why like Ryan is leaning away from having defaults and things like that, because you don't want to have to encode a level of logic into the payload when a catalog or whatever sending it can actually just encode that into their response.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, Prashant. Sorry for that, Russell. Just to my understanding, yes, I know defining the policies on the catalog side, but basically there should be a, the signature from on the respect, and we will receive the policies. That's why I'm saying that at least if we have a basic how we are going to receive the policies, and if you know how we are going to roughly define the policies, then we can go to that section.
So that's in a different section of this. We were basically going on so when Prashant started this off, he wanted to start by talking about the catalog or the column hiding first, because we basically have two aspects. One is those kind of restrictions. So that's the read restriction, is how we are expressing the policy. And then this is the column transformation, which is how we're doing column hiding and column restrictions. So basically two components. So like that is in the same spec. It's just at the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just to like touch on that, like as Russell said, deny is a representation. It does not say that catalog should only support denying columns. Deny is a representation. Catalog can very well be operating on allow list. It's just that when it's sending it back to the engines, that representation says that these are the columns denied. In the end, catalog just supports allow list, that hey, you have access to this column or not. So let's say if I have 100 columns, catalog just tracks which columns you are allowed. So out of like 99 that I can see, I will just say that, okay, you're not allowed to see one, rather than just I'm tracking that 99 you are allowed to see. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The second thing is, again, talking about defining policies versus like, taking a step back in defining policies versus what we are having it here returning policy evaluation result. So one very common example here is that at this point we don't define grants, right? That who has select permission, who has write permission. But when we are vending the credential, we vend the credential based on what grants the catalog has. But those are not defined in IRC, right? So other aspect is like one is to define a policy structure, right? Okay, this is describing your column hiding, column seeing policies. The other aspect is to give the policy evaluation result to do something actionable in the engine. That is where what we are calling it as read restriction here. This is equivalent to, as we have discussed in before, the vended credential, which are the results on what grants you have. Similarly, it's the results of what policies, fine grained policies you have. Based on those policy, catalog thinks this is what you should do, right? So, and anyone can have a policy store that is backed by Ranger, that is backed by OPA, that can be backed by Polaris as a policy store. But when it comes to IRC, what IRC takes as a pen on is describing that based on whatever policy store you have, catalog thinks that engine needs to do these things. So this is what we are trying to do here in the read restriction part of the spec. Now, how to express any kind of policies. We had these discussions as well. Like, for example, someone supports policy as strict SQL string. Someone can try to come up with a different intermediate representation. For that, we have a different, like, if you'll see, there is, like, as Russell said, that we have, like, on the fourth section on the discussion is the expression expansion, right? That's where we will discuss on how to express arbitrarily defined policies in different SQL dialects inside the policy representation. That's where the expression expansion comes into.
Okay, I'm taking issue with that statement because like we just say like we don't want policies as part of things. What we are returning in the IRC is decisions from the policy engine, which is hosted by the catalog. So for me, the expression expansion is really about like how we can make the decision language, like how, like what the engine should be applying, more expressive, so that like the catalog can return like can use like richer policies and return like richer decisions back to IRC. But like it's not a policy language. Like that's like a strict declaration between the two. Like when we started this, or when we rebooted that Iceberg restoration effort together. Like really, like we wanted like the policies to be out of the scope because there's like potentially as many policies and authorization engines as well like vendors out there. And like in the past, like basically we went nowhere with that. So we are taking a much more scoped approach and only focusing on how the catalog can transmit like the restriction engine need to be applied. So basically just the decisions. The policies is like things that's, for example, like if you're interested in joining the discussion on Polaris, like we are like discussing the type of interfaces which would allow like policy engines to be plugged in. I'm sure like other catalogs have like similar discussion as well. But like that's not the scope of that discussion. I just want like to be careful here. Like we don't like jump into the trap and deviate from just discussing the decision part.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, yeah, I was trying to put a similar statement on the same. Defining policies is a very, very big discussion. I don't think we can even reach into a standard where every vendor says that, hey, this is a common expressible policy. Maybe, who knows, we can one day. But what we can agree on is this kind of a scenario, how we are expressing the policy decision as part of the load table. Yeah. These were my final say. Yeah, I see Alex hand up. Alex, do you want to say something?
I know we keep going on about this. In my mind, it doesn't seem like not talking about policies will preclude us from doing policy work in the future. Like right now, with all belongs to the catalog, and if we so choose to do policy work in the future, that avenue is still open to us.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
I would also add that this may be something where it is appropriate for a different project or body to do that work. I'm also very skeptical that it is possible, given how much is built up around these systems and like unexpressible things. Like, you know, do you apply your allow list or your deny list first, and then, you know, as you chain things, what rules do those, what order do the rules get applied in? Like all of that affects policy outcomes, and it's super hard to specify. But yeah, we are definitely open to exchange in that way at a later time.
Totally agree. Kevin, do you have? I see your hand.
Yeah, I kind of have a different question. So if there's anything to wrap up on this topic left before I go.
No, I think I believe no, I think we are pretty much done. I think for at least from the allow and deny list, we definitely have seems like we have an agreement on the default behavior should be deny, and catalog should model their allow and deny list to that representation. So at least for that data bullet point, we have a little bit consensus on. Yeah.
I'm not sure that. So if the default behavior is deny, then that means we're saying an allow list.
No. The behavior will gonna be defined deny. I'm not saying that will be a default behavior. The expression will be denied for now, and if there is a future extension required, we can say that okay, the behavior is tunable in allow or deny. But so far, we'll be going with the deny list. Is what I'm saying.
We're going with a deny list. I'm on board. I thought that was the consensus as well, but I was confused by what you said. So
okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess I want to take a step back because we took 40 minutes to answer one of the questions out of the 4 in the doc. I mean, it's great that we had a lot of discussions. I think it was a really important question. I guess what I'm trying to get at is like this holistically. I look at the spec PR and everything. Like what is the path to move forward on this, right? Like we have a couple more questions. Is it that these are the final questions that we should answer before we can move forward? Just like, generally, what are the steps left to like kind of make this a reality, like kind of move forward with the spec and spec PR?
I think that there's a lot of discussion still left to be had. I mean, we have the other points that are on here. I'm not sure that everybody has had a chance to look at the actual spec changes specifically, and I think that there are still comments on those. So, I mean, I think we'll probably have a few discussions to get a general understanding and agreement of like what this looks like as a complete thing, and then we have to get on to deciding whether we think it's in shape to actually introduce as a spec. We also need a reference implementation, and I think at this point we need to make sure that we have reference implementations before we introduce new things to the spec, because we still have a number of things where we don't have reference implementations for, and I don't want to continue that path. So there's quite a few things that still need to happen. Not just the same process that we use for pretty much everything, whether it's REST spec or table spec. I think REST spec has been moving a little faster, mostly because we kind of like add these features independently. It's not major version changes like the table spec is, but that's kind of what the process has been to date.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's good to know. I think I'm just catching up on this whole topic, and I see there's already a lot of discussions. So just curious, like kind of what the process that you just described is.
Yeah, I think I believe this is the first meeting we've had, other than like touching on it in other syncs. So we're still kind of early in the generating consensus phase, like getting everybody kind of on the same page about like what we're talking about, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to, dissent, and then addressing any of those concerns. So
gotcha. Okay, yeah, that's good to know. So right now we're just kind of generating consensus on the proposed spec. Okay, thanks.
Did you want to add anything there? Or did you have a separate topic?
No, I want to add something here. Like, I mean, my point of view on the spec is that like, there's just like maybe like a couple of minor issues, nothing, no. Like there's like the practical, like is the spec practical to use by catalogs or various vendors? And I think that's an important question. And like in the current state, we have like only the few. I mean, right now the expression language is a bit too rigid. There's only like a few actions we can use, and I don't see. I mean, as a catalog implementer or like vendor, if you want. Like I think like that's I don't see us being able to implement the full length or like do the things and be probably like a very like degraded experience compared to what we offer otherwise. So I think for me, like I just want basically like the point 4, I guess, to be discussed even more, like how we can, for example, introduce like UDF support in the expression, and I think that's where you will start seeing really like implementation, starting really implementing in depth that spec and benefit the whole ecosystem.
I'll just add that I agree with that. In fact, I think the comment that I dropped on the spec was I actually don't like calling out specific transforms in the spec if we also have a UDF approach. Like we should just lean into that. And one of the concerns that I want to raise, like this is a consistent thing that we have to worry about, is like when we get into specific engine behaviors, we don't want to put something in the spec that would make engines non-compliant by default. So if there are engines that want to support this, but they don't, they don't have that exact behavior. If we put in like a, certain, hash transform or something like that, they would not be able to comply with the spec as the spec is stated without going and like updating their engine to do exactly what the spec is saying. So I do think the UDF approach is probably the right way to go. I would like to see that just because it gives us a lot more flexibility. But I agree. Like, there's still a lot of things I think spec-wise that we need to discuss. I'll hand it over to Ryan.
I just want to call out that expressions have been coming up a lot more. And after I'm done with the file format stuff, hopefully very soon, I'm working on a proposal to expand the expressions language. That is going to, sort of take into account what we already have and hopefully expand it to where we can express a lot more things, mostly as apply function calls, which would include UDFs, because I think UDFs are how you get to like that complicated engine specific syntax and things like that, the cross-engine UDFs. So yes, I agree. We need for our expressions to be a lot more expressive, and I think that we will definitely do that. The overlap in this case is, I think, thinking through, how do we, if we model this part of it as using, if we model this part of it as using predicates for the read restrictions on rows, I think that as we expand the language of things that you can put into predicates, we will get to where you're talking about. And then the column restriction side, we're thinking about having a transformation that calls out to a UDF and ends up going through that same expression path. But mostly, I think that we actually don't want to use expressions there because I think that the set of things you want to do to a column is pretty well understood. And what we don't want to do is, have all these engines that can't read tables because they don't know how to, run this specific expression to mask a column. So I would propose actually a small limited set of well-known, well-defined column masks, like, mask alphanumeric kind of thing, truncate last 4 or something like that, and then move forward with that. I don't know if that sounds reasonable, but I think that that's how I would approach the expressiveness problem.
Just to respond to that, I mean, in with respect to expressions, like we know that there are like a common set of like UDFs that will probably exist across engines, that are ANSI SQL or, ANSI adjacent. And similarly, we could have a set of policy-based ones that we collect from different systems that, are used for transforms. I have an issue with codifying it in the spec because that also limits our ability to expand the spec. Like if you want to introduce a new one, you have to go to the spec and update it. And if we have some that are in the spec and some that are out of spec, that kind of creates confusion too. So I guess the real question for use of UDFs and everything, do we think that that's going to be compatible with V3 and before, since this is purely, kind of in the shape of a trusted relationship. So we're not like saying, hey, we have to wait until v4 in order to get any of this in place with REST catalog, or do we think that it'll be possibly compatible all the way back? Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think there's any reason why it can't be compatible with v3. Like I think that this part of the REST spec progresses on its own. So yeah, I would say we don't want to tie this to v4.
Yeah, if I may add more on this thing, because we've been having same set of thoughts on how do we express the column transformations and the row filtering both independently. For example, for row filters, it's anyways going to be predicate means true or false that needs to be returned from that. So as expression still is a predicate, it's just that that predicate needs to be expanded to reference to an UDF. That's something straightforward. The other thing is like having a column list, now defining transforms. So this is where one thing keeps on coming that, and I want to know the feedback here is like, do we want to say that transform has an apply function, which reference to a UDF, and which essentially will go back to the catalog, load the UDF in the engine protocol point of view and do that? Or do we say that a column list is a list of expressions rather than list of terms? Or like, how do we express that list of transformation, assuming that it's allow and deny for the same time? Just like double, like agreeing on like some predefined mask. This is also coming from our analysis from Ranger. If you see, Ranger works on some set of predefined masks, which are very like, have a well-defined meaning. So I believe either we define a transform for that, or we just define an action for that, and then we go from there. So definitely predefined masks make sense. But what I would like to know more is that how do we model the column more? Like, do we have a mixture of expression transform, expression references transform, or transforms directly reference to UDF? That's one other question of mine. I guess I have questions, so I will let anyone who have like who wants to answer this, or we can just go by hands. We have. Okay, I'll let go then.
I was under impression when we, designing the user-defined function for the catalog, I thought that it's kind of a tool to use this kind of restricted reads. And basically, once we have the catalog user-defined function endpoint, and the defining like data masking and other things is just a UDF, which we can call inside of our user-defined function. And the libraries has to be part of the engine itself. I share one of the library, for example, Presidio. By the way, it's very cool library to data masking and any kind of masking. I used previously, and for example, we can use that things inside of that user-defined function. And if we have policy apply, like apply user-defined function, I believe it will cover all of the things. We don't need to extend the expressions in that sense for data masking and others, or well-defined data masking kind of things. I just want to get your thoughts. That's why I asked.
I have a direct reply to that, but Laurent, I believe, is next.
I mean, if you want to go first, and then I just if you want to reply to that, go ahead.
So I was originally in agreement with you, Talat, that we would, just punt to expressions on this. I think, though, that once we started getting into how to define this list, it started getting super awkward, because you want it to be minimal, and at the same time you have a lot of restrictions for these expressions. So it can be any expression, but you need to alias the result of the expression to the original column. It needs to preserve the original column type. And it must, when you're referencing something and you're masking or transforming data, you should be only referring to the original column as well. And those restrictions got super awkward. And I think that in addition, if you say like, hey, we're just going to have, some expression, then you're relying on basically too much freedom, right? If I were to write that expression in Spark, it would be a regex replace, right? Say a mask expression. I have a series of regex replace things. Regex replace is not a thing in other languages, right? That's a Spark specific function. But we all know what, alphanumeric mask kind of means. And so to solve those two problems, I actually wrote out like what this would look like in JSON and all those cases. And I think that it's far simpler to have this list be a pair of a column ID and an action, right? Some action that must be applied. And those actions can be extremely well defined. Then an engine can actually like not just implement it as a series of regex replace, but like a single regex, or can like do a really good job optimizing that thing. And we know that it is going to be a lot more portable that way. So I would actually say we do want to be able to apply these engine specific UDFs and expressions. I would just not make that the the channel that everything goes through. I would define a series of 6 to 10 reasonable column masks or actions like suppress column, something like that, and then have that as sort of a safety valve. I think that makes for a cleaner API here, and also is going to increase our ability to have portable column masks. I'd love to hear responses to that too, if that's Laurent.
Yeah, so I think so that's a good time, and like for my answer, like I understand why you're going for, but like I think like it's probably not what will happen. Like if you allow people, if you allow UDF, because of the flexibility of UDF, like catalogs and the catalogs and the authorization engines beyond the catalogs, we basically leverage probably UDF a lot because of the flexibility. And we not use the predefined ones because they're just too restrictive. And like if I look at my own set of use cases, like we have more than six sections. We have much more, like, or we have complex logics. That's really like what customer wants to do, and like they have like customer have a lot of imagination. So what I think will happen is basically people will use UDF, and those actions basically will be here, but like nobody in practice will use them. So I'm like, why even like bother? But I think what we can do is more like on the UDF side, come with like a dialect, which actually like covers like a subset of SQL, or like maybe another expression, because like I don't think like UDF is tied to SQL. When
a dialect.
Yeah. But like we can come maybe like with a dialect specifically for policy engines when like we agree on like the security policies. Right. Like I got several inquiries about that from various other vendors as well. And so that's because everybody's concerned about like the interoperability for sure between engines and catalogs, and between also like what catalogs can express. But like from what I've seen also, like the 6 default action, maybe 8, 10, that's still not enough compared to what people want. And like I'm just afraid that people basically will shift to what give them the most flexibility, maybe at the expense of interoperability.
I think that's a good point. Like, I do believe that we need the UDF for interoperability, right? Like, I don't think the space of everything that people want to express is going to be there. But I think that we call out like, hey, for interoperability, this set of things is going to work across engines and have a way to express that. And then like UDFs, you're responsible for interoperability by registering multiple dialects, and like I think that we should have both ways of doing things. I think that would allow people to maximize interop or to maximize expressibility, and it's really a user choice.
Yeah. If I may add more into like on this dialect specific thing, because I did a lot of research, because one of our initial proposal was to have secure views, and this was like being punched a lot there. So the thing is that agreeing on a common SQL dialect like SQL 92, and we expect everyone like Spark, Trino, everyone agrees to that particular ANSI SQL dialect, will be a very big thing. So what I generally see is that what will happen, and again it's my guess, is that there will be certain set of engines that we will say that okay, this is a dialect every engine agrees to, and that will happen. But there cannot, like, I have some reservations on saying that there will be a general SQL 92 kind of a ANSI dialect that every engine will say that okay, it's going to happen, so now a catalog just expresses their policy in that particular dialect and then it works. So that's one aspect. The on like, okay, definitely we want UDF, there is no doubt in like UDF being more expressive and catalog selecting okay which engines they want the interoperable UDF dialects to be in, and it's definitely a freedom that they deserves and they can do that. But one other way or a rationale to have predefined actions is what we have something in Ranger, where they have like a fixed set of dialect, a fixed set of mask, and they just define what that means and they just enforce it throughout. So while we have given the freedom for UDF, there is also a way something we can achieve at this point of time where we just shift the burden to the supported engines and they support that they can do that. So that's one other way of thinking that. So I would like, this is one other thing that comes into mind when I was thinking about it. If you'll see what Ryan said, that it has the exhaustive list. In fact, action is what Ryan suggested in the first place. But this is what also in practice is being used. If you see the selecting mask type, it has like very defined way of defining what this action means, and we can just go from here. So that's what my 2 cents are on having a common dialect that everyone agrees to in terms of UDF representation, and a case for we definitely should have it, but we should also have some kind of a defined mask to give flexibility of what people have at this point of time. Yeah. Dan?
I just wanted to comment, like, first is, I don't like the idea of punting to SQL. If we are in any way punting to SQL, we just probably haven't done the work to spec things out properly. With the exception of views, like where we did kind of delegate to different dialects of, SQL, and in UDFs, there's a little bit of a flavor of that, but ultimately, I think especially for these kind of things, we want a strict representation that then people can have custom implementations to achieve the result for data protection consistently. But I would also say that, like, what we're talking about in terms of having certain functions that are somewhat consistent across implementations, whether they come from Ranger or like some other place, or, in a Muta, or like, somebody else that provides the list. We just need to work to figure out, well, which ones do we want to kind of like push to support generally? And this is similar to what we've been talking about with UDFs and expression support, where there's like, certain ones that exist within the ANSI SQL that we may define as like, hey, we expect everybody to kind of have implementations for these kind of things. So we may do the same kind of thing for policy and just call out which ones we think are consistent enough or portable enough that we could actually implement or expect everybody to kind of implement across the board. But I really don't like the idea of just saying that, like, oh, well, then here's just like a SQL blob, go do whatever you want. That's not very portable. It introduces, lots of complications. So I would prefer not to go the path of like expecting people to interpret SQL. And in the past, we've had issues where that could potentially open up gaping holes because you can stuff all sorts of other stuff in SQL. It's a very broad representation. We don't want to introduce that, or then trying to define like, oh, well, this is the allowed subset that you have to support within this like confined area. So like, even if you said like expression within SQL, it's huge.
Agree with this. one just to add on same set of thoughts, we were thinking of, since we're thinking of returning the evaluated decisions. So one way I was thinking is that if we have a masking policy, like case when user is Prashant, then do mask this, like with using this action. If user is let's say Dan, then do this mask. We can just evaluate this whole in the catalog and then just return the action that we want in the catalog to do that, rather than taking that complexity hit to even express the whole complex dialect thing into an action that Iceberg understands on that front. So,
I think one of the challenges, though, is that like there is no standard out there for this.
yes, yeah, that's
Whereas, like SQL, as messy as the standard may be, like there is something to point to. If we're pointing to like, oh, here's the ranger definition, here's the immuted definition, here's the other one, and we're trying to find some union or subset of these things. I think I saw Ryan comment, well, maybe we should just fall back to EDFs. And so that may be just a discussion that we have, like as we look through this and figure out, like, is there enough commonality or overlap that we think that this makes sense? Or should we just kind of fall back to, hey, you have to provide an implementation. Here's, you know, what the catalog defines. Make sure that that's consistent. Whoever's setting it up has to do the trust relationship anyway. They should.
Let me be specific about what I'm saying. I'm saying that, like, I think that there is a small set of things that if we define them well, users will use for portability. I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, users will continue to use, you know, UDFs that are taking on the portability themselves because they can express it in Spark syntax and Dremio syntax and whatever else they choose to do. So, like, I think we will be proven right or wrong by users. I don't think that there's any obligation for us to, you know, add more and more and more things that are unreasonable to the set of transformations that we expect, or actions that we expect for people to use.
that definitely makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it neither not to be an either or from day one. We can start with both and see from there, and go from where we want to be. Okay. So I guess yeah.
It'll also take some time,
Yes.
right? Like right now, our users have, you know, our policies are attached by writing UDFs and labeling columns and labeling tables.
Yes.
Because of the use of UDFs, I think that we see like people are pretty creative with their syntax. We see this in default values too, right? Like cast null as timestamp 9 or whatever, you know, like current UTC timestamp, and then from UTC timestamp, and some, like a lot of things for basically the current timestamp function. So like there's a broad spectrum of what people are trying to, how people express what they're trying to do. I believe that if we give them a subset, they will standardize and, you know, use this for portability, but it'll take a long time for it to happen because everything is currently like whatever they dreamed up as UDFs today. But like, I still think like it's worth trying.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that rationale. Let's start with like having a mixed list, and obviously we are open for review. If someone has a very strong case against it, then maybe we can rethink about it. But so far, I think I'm also +1 on having this. It does not hurt, and it gives the way if someone wants to choose just UDFs over that. So on the same page. We are already 7 minutes after time.
What is action item for this? You guys are going to create a list of the.
It's already added in the spec PR itself. So we have worked out on a small set of list already, and we have it in the PR itself. This is mostly inspired by, I think, some research we did from Ranger and based on Ryan's feedback. So please do have a look if you have further recommendations on if there anything that needs to be there from day one. But this is the list that's already part of the spec at this point of time. The second action item is something Ryan will be driving on, the expression expansion with the UDF references. So that's another. Yeah. Okay, cool. I think we are already 8 minutes of the time. I would like to conclude but I have a request. I have a bounded expression CERD APR. I will go into details maybe in the next session to explain why it's required. But if you all have time, please do have a look and give your support, because this is something that is required for time travel kind of a scenario in which you rename these columns. And
But do we still need that if we are switching to a set of fixed transform plus plus UDF?
we would need this for wraps which are non-UDF dependent. For example, country equals USA kind of a wrap. For those, we can directly reference to that particular column. We don't need.
Are you talking in the filter masking or talking?
Yeah, filter. Yeah, it's for both the things, filter and DDM both. So it's just adding it at a term level. So yes.
Okay, so I'm just trying to, because I was under the impression that we were going towards not supporting expression for column masking instead of something which is much more restricted, which was just predefined transformations and possibly UDF. Did I get that wrong during the meeting?
I mean,
Ryan?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Didn't we just suggest that we should move away from having expressions for column masking and instead just focus on predefined transforms and UDF?
Yes, so it is both. I think that we want to have a UDF path. So one of the actions is run this UDF, right? But then I think that we also want to introduce a set of predefined transforms that we are requiring to be portable, so that we start standardizing that space across engines. Happy to have objections to that, but I think that we're mostly okay with that at the very least.
Okay, so just because we were when I asked right now, it was we need the bound expression for column masking, I was a bit confused because it seems we are moving away. So
wrap.
I mean, we put that in the notes and we can validate the notes on the mailing list, and then we update the PR.
Yeah, we do need bound expression for the UDF, apply this UDF, as well as for the basics of expression, the predicate expressions.
Yes.
So where
raw filtering
column is in some value.
Precisely. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, on the same page. So I think I'll capture all the notes, summarize them, send it over the mailing list. And please do take a look in this PR if you get time. And thank you so much, everyone, for this discussion. As always, looking forward to seeing you tomorrow in the next discussion. It was a really nice discussion. Bye.